You're interested in quiet women, women who don't make a noise, women who are not recognized in, the public sphere. So, and you coincide this with your own journey, which is maybe quiet, I don't know. So, tell us, how did this book come about? I mean, quiet and book doesn't quite go together, but...
Yeah, quiet and book definitely don't go together, but I'm also a practitioner of poetry, which I've often described as the art of the murmured voice. So I'm very accustomed to not being heard. I think I grew up feeling that I would never be heard. Without a mic, I actually cannot be heard, even in small groups. And poetry became for me a very vital, intense, necessary way to express myself and to be heard, by those who want to hear, those who care to hear. And over the years, I found that there is a way in which the murmur finds its way and finds its place. And there are recipients of the murmur. It may not produce a big splash, but it creates imperceptible shifts within internal, there are internal tectonic plates that shift with the murmur. So I keep the faith as far as poetry is concerned. But when it came to women on the path, Manju, as a seeker, a long-time spiritual traveler myself, I felt that there was really a drought as far as women on this path were concerned. I am deeply grateful to all the male mystics and teachers I encountered, deeply grateful, indebted. They matter to me a great deal. But I also felt the need to hear the voices of women. And I found that the voices of women often tend to be either ignored, excluded, which we know from cultural and literary canons all over the world, and certainly on the spiritual path. You just don't hear of women very often. And when you do hear of them, it's invariably as plaster saints and calendar art figures. And that kind of flattening of female complexity, of just human complexity, was for me troubling. And I longed to know more about the Meeras and Andals, but I, always came up against this kind of image that was difficult to get past. And so between exclusion and trivialization, I think we've just lost so many voices. That's how this book began.
In the book, you're weaving your accounts of these, I don't know what to call them, saints, spiritual figures, gurus, along with poems. So you seem to be straddling the poetic and prose. Is it easy to switch from one to another? Or, did you find it difficult? And how and why did you club the two together? You've written tons of poetry books, tons, it's amazing. And this, so it's almost as though you couldn't keep the poetic voice out. There it was, struggling to find its way in. Was that the way it happened?
That's a great question. Actually, I conceived of this book just as a book of essays. But when the book was done, it was very clear to me that poems were necessary, because poems are often an invitation to read in a particular way. They're an invitation to a change of tone, and sometimes they're just a palate cleanser that allows you to move from one kind of narrative, one kind of portrait to another. So poems are actually deeply an invitation to mystery. They always have been. And most of us, when we don't have to be schooled in the art of reading poetry, most of us intuitively recognize that. We don't expect poems to make sense, into inverted commas, in quite the same way that we expect prose. So this allowed me the kind of buoyancy and the kind of flagrant disregard for joining the dots that is an essential part of narratives of this kind.
I was really interested in the kinds of women who you interviewed. One was Lata Mani. I taught Lata Mani in college. So, yeah. So here she was, this Marxist feminist and extremely insightful narrative, along with, and this kind of, if you like, contradiction. you know, in your account of these women, there's silence, they're enjoined to silence, they don't speak, and yet in a way you are telling their story. You talk of your search for a guru. I don't know if he's male or female, but whatever. So, I mean, it seems to me that in the book there are many binaries. There's language, there's silence, there are clothes, they're not clothes. I mean, here's this woman who is naked. And I mean, the whole thing is full of all kinds of contradictions. There is, you know, I mean, there's one woman who wears jeans. There's another who doesn't wear anything. So, and then also between the guru that is here that you can see, and this other woman says, my guru is Lord Shiva, and she's quite emphatic about that. So, as I said, the book is full of these binaries. So, how did you come to terms with that? You know, the more I thought about it, the more there were.
Yes, I think there's really no way to talk about the realm of the mystical without in some way entering the realm of contradiction. The thing with the people I've met who've embodied in some way a journey of this kind, an inner journey of this kind, is that they embody a state of inspired contradiction. You know, they embody all those coexisting at the same time, and I have no problem with it as a listener. I'm not there, as you see in the book, I'm not really there to judge them as much as I am to just absorb these awe-inspiring narratives. The diversity of these women was integral to the composition of this book. So one, as you point out, is ecstatic. The other, she's an avadhuta. The other is contemplative. One is a woman who's cast off all clothing, and we think this is something that, you know, we talk of Akka Mahadevi in the 12th century, and we talk of Lal Ded in the 14th. Here's this woman living this life today. Yeah, she's cast off all clothing. And there's another who wears blue jeans. There's one who is a monk, and I see that as a perfectly valid and interesting life choice. But it doesn't in any way negate another life choice, which is of the householder. There's also another woman who's that. There's one who's a yogini. There's one who's on the path of Tantra. And to me, this is a tribute to the tremendous plurality of spiritual persuasions that are still alive in the subcontinent, which we just don't talk about enough. We flatten it. We are always reaching towards mechanisms that flatten because we are uncomfortable with all the unruly complexity that makes up our inheritance. And that complexity is its strength, isn't it? So to me, it was really a chance to celebrate all these living, breathing, spiritual traditions, where tradition and improvisation are not seen as being at loggerheads at all.
Yeah, what struck me about your book and these women were their inclusive attitudes, you know, exactly the thing you said, that, I mean, just because they are, you know, follow, I guess, what might seem as a Hindu spiritual path, this was not to negate or denigrate any other path, and I thought that was almost a brave book. I mean, can I say that today? But whatever. It was really interesting because these women are the apotheosis of this kind of spirituality, and yet they are, I mean, I wonder whether it was because they were women. Do you think?
It's a good question. I think they're women who are not in a hurry to arrive in terms of any external role. You know, most of them are women in formation, as it were, not established gurus. So perhaps there is a willingness then to be braver, more fluid in the way in which they present themselves. That's one part of it. And the other thing is that I've never been interested in gatekeepers and what gatekeepers have to say. I'm interested in what the explorers have to say, what the seekers have to say, what the travelers have to say. And these women are travelers. They see themselves as verbs, not as nouns.
Yeah. Thank you. Arundhathi. One small last question and then we'll move on to Mansi. You know, which is always your next book. What's your next book going to be about?
The next book is actually the book I was working on when this one came and interrupted that journey. It's an anthology of women mystics in the subcontinent down the ages, starting with the Buddhist nuns of the Therigatha, including many of the women who've been published by people like Urvashi, who've done fabulous work in this area. But this is a compilation of many, many voices. There are 56 women mystics in the book. And also male poets who speak in the female voice and what that does to their poetry, as well as goddess poems. So it's an anthology that straddles these three areas around the female presence in sacred poetry. It's called Wild Women.
That's a fabulous title. So, thank you, Arundhathi. And now Mansi. Mansi, this book, Sharve, when I was reading it, you seem to talk about so many things: gender, caste, history, medicine, a thirst for knowledge, female empowerment, and all that in an 8th century figure. So how did this idea come to, I mean, you're a philosopher by profession and an academic, and how did you think of writing a novel about these things? I mean, you write academic papers about this, and it's very clear that you have many themes you wish to explore. But why a novel rather than how you've been exploring it so far?
Thank you, Manju. So I was always a storyteller. You get pushed into academics because that's one way where you write. But what I actually saw was that it actually started in an academic conference, this whole thing. So I was in search of women philosophers and soul sister Arundhathi. So I was looking for the mystics, the philosophers, and I was looking at this history of flattening of women into some kind of mystics sometimes. There is intellectual thought, but apart from certain kinds of male voices that project these as intellectual thoughts, we don't hear anything about the life of these women. Now, as a woman academic and as a philosopher, I always saw a gender divide. Philosophy is one of the most patriarchal subjects and discipline because Meera Bainder teaches philosophy in a university. Other male professors are philosophers who teach at a university. So the very language of divide irritated me, frustrated me. And then when I went to a conference, I must thank my mentors, Gopal Guru and Dr. Sundar Sarkar, because I was telling them they wrote a beautiful book called Caste, about caste, 2 books in fact. And then I said, what about the womanly experience? You don't have any women's bodies there because when we are menstruating, we are low caste. And when we are touched by everyone and sexually assaulted, that caste doesn't come in. So where is that experience? Why are you only writing from a male perspective? And this was like a PhD student challenging the guides, which you often do. And then they said, Meera, we don't know, you write about it. And then I wanted to write about it. Then I said, should I write caste experience too in an academic book? Then I said, no, that's not what a woman will do. She will tell a story. And she will tell a story about a woman philosopher who didn't exist. So because there is no woman philosopher in 6th century and we don't know about her if she did, I created her. And I gave her everything that the women in my life have inspired. There's a professor who started her own school. There is a caste woman who was not allowed to study. There was somebody who struggled with a divorce and the child went away with the father. So all these women were dancing in my head. And I needed somewhere to tell the story. And I layered her. And we are multi-layered. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about laundry. It's true. It's not that I'm sitting like a professor. I'm thinking about the marks I submitted, whether they go. So we are multi-layered. And that makes non-flattening of these characters. And women can hold these multiple characters. And so that's why I created Shelby.
It was so interesting reading your book because the account of Sharve is interspersed with accounts of how you came, your first person, how you came to write her, and it's almost, that's the way you present it, as though this woman was forcing herself through your consciousness, wanting to be put on the page. So this is an account of writing as well. And writing is one of the strong themes in this, because this is a girl who's not allowed to learn anything. So she has these palm leaves that she hides in that bamboo rod and so on and so forth. So writing and communication plays, your own and hers, a very strong part in this book. And you're a teacher, so that's part of it, I guess. So would you say that, what would you say about this, the importance of communicating as a woman?
So, as Arundhathi remarked earlier, women's voices are not heard. And even if you're a professor and you yell in class, it's not heard. Sometimes what happens is, when we write, what happens is our voices get through language, and we take command of language, and the perspective, I realize language is gendered. So when we take the perspective of a woman's right and write it out, people have observed me writing even recently. It just flows. It's like I can't type in the computer. I have to write in longhand, and the pen simply flies. It's as if this consciousness, feminist consciousness, all that I studied, all the experiences that I had, and I've had quite a lot of experiences, they just start to tumble out in words. And luckily, I'm educated. I have had, my mother bought me Reader's Digest when I was young. So I've read like all the English authors. I've read all the Indian authors, including your books. So when I write the experience, I realize that we emote, and our writing is actually our voices from the heart. So it's not, intellect comes in later when we're editing, but when we write, I think we write somewhere from, let's say, let me not call it the heart. The heart is something men have. Women have uteruses. We write from our karulu. We write from where we have our PMS and our cramps, right? We have estrogen. Our hearts are very strong till we get menopause. Sorry, we don't have heart pain. We have stomach pain. If you notice, we hold ourselves like that when we cry. So I write from my uterus. That's where I write. I birth my stories, literally. And I think it's time for us to recognize that we keep on reading these authors who write about heartbreak. My heart doesn't break. My stomach and my inner self just tears itself apart when I'm sad. So I think we now start to see that woman come out, and that's where the novel starts flowing. So I write from my insides. Yeah.
Gosh, that's amazing. So, you write from your inside. Okay. And I guess when you wrote Sharve, you were wanting to reach a larger audience than just, the classroom, and, disseminate these ideas. And I guess you've been successful. I mean, look at all the clapping. So, okay, you mentioned that you've written 5 novels, but unpublished. Why unpublished? The world is waiting to hear you.
There will be correction and classes and entering marks and attendance. That's why they don't get published, and developing curriculum. But I participate. I would like to thank November Vrimo India, which is a part of National November Novel Writing Month. So every November, a bunch of us sit down and write 50,000 words. And this book was the first Nano Vrimo novel. It takes a lot. We just write down the plot, and then it takes a lot of time to edit. I write in longhand, so it takes a long time to type. Interestingly, when I was studying in college, Dad told me to take typing classes, and I told him very smartly, I'll have a typist. I'm not going to learn typing. And now I regret it because I do this finger typing. So it takes a long time. Luckily, my students have volunteered to kind of type up the book, but my handwriting is questionable. But I think that these will come out, and the next one is probably going to be a fan fiction of Jane Austen. I love her. And Northanger Abbey's fan fiction will come. And the recent book is very, very interesting. It's an Outlander-inspired time travel. South Indian girl going and falling into Jahangir's medieval India kingdom and falling in love with a medieval Indian. So it's coming. It's all coming. And I hope in the next few years, it'll all come. Thanks to my publishers who are pushing me. And yeah, that will happen.
So it won't be spiritual then?
There will be philosophy in everything. In the time travel, the object that does the time travel talks about time and life. So there will be this interspersing. There will always be philosophy in it. So it'll be slightly heavier, but easy enough for any woman to read. My point is to reach the common audience.
Yeah, of course.
Audience,
That is always the point. Thank you, Mansi. Thank you. And okay, now we have Urvashi. I'm almost going to say Urvashi needs no introduction. Urvashi and I have known each other for 55 years, I was calculating. So we were in college together, we were neighbors when we were young. And, I visited her house I don't know how many times. So, So, Urvashi, you were, you broke ground with your publishing, first Kali for women and then later on Zuban. So what made, at that time when nobody, no woman or nobody, was thinking of being a publisher, publishing houses were big houses. So what made you move in that direction? What was your journey?
Yeah, thanks, Manju. Listening to Arundhathi and Mansi is like music to my ears because they are saying all the things that women today are saying, a lot of women today are saying. So I was silently applauding, and I was making notes because Arundhathi used some stunning phrases which I shall steal without and use in when I'm talking. And I have to tell you a little detail about Mansi, which she didn't tell you herself when she's talking about her, the book which is set in Jahangir's court. On the way here, she told me, and in the research, I discovered this amazing thing that at that time, they used to squat and use the toilet. I don't know where it's coming from, the uterus or the heart, but it was a very interesting detail. So thank you for that. So where did, we started Kali in 1984. And it was at the height of the women's movement in this country when women of my generation who came into feminism, late 70s, mid 70s, that kind of time, were involved in campaigns against dowry, against rape, against injectable contraceptives which were being experimented on women's bodies. And we knew all this was wrong instinctually, but we knew zero about it. We didn't know, for example, why dowry was taking the shape that it was taking. What was it that led men and their families, particularly also senior women, to kill young women in order to just get money to start off their lives? I mean, how did marriage become a way to setting up your commercial career or financing your next business? And the death of the woman was incidental to it. So when we started looking around for something that could help us understand the sociology, history, the complexity of the issues that women were facing, there was nothing. I was at that time working in a publishing house. That was my first job. I was working with the Oxford University Press. And the men I worked with, mostly men, were really lovely Bengali guys who were very open, but who had never, ever thought about women. So I think that Mansi said something about, we don't, when you talk to men and you said to them, to Sundar and Gopal Guru, and they said, we don't know, you write about it. But the question really is, why the hell don't they know? How can you be in that position and not know? So my colleagues at that time, my bosses, basically, I went to them and said, why don't we publish books about women? And they said, but women, do they write? Do they read? Do they have anything to say? Are women's issues even serious issues? And there was a genuine question there. I mean, we do laugh at it, and I laugh at it also, but the fact was it wasn't until the mid or late 70s that we began to find the tools to study women. It wasn't until that time that a discipline which is today known as women or gender studies or sexuality studies entered the domain. It wasn't until that time that actually scholars, and it began with scholars, even agreed that the domestic sphere, the private sphere, the realm of the uterus and of private life was even a legitimate area of study. So women walking without clothes would have been an absolute no-no because the public world was not meant for women. So to enter it, to study it, to understand it, tools began to develop as a result of push from the women's movement. Those were all the circumstances that led to us thinking of starting a feminist publishing house. Because when my bosses said, but women, do they read, write, etc., I thought, okay, if they're not going to do it, I'll do it. I was young and foolhardy and foolish, but when you are young, you have a lot of courage also. So really a long answer to your question, Manju.
But you stayed the course, Urvashi. You know, you're not young and stupid now. You're old and wise. I mean, not old, sorry.
Old.
But whatever. But, you know, you moved from Kali to Zuban, and so you've stayed the course. And do you feel, I mean, now there are women's studies, gender studies, all this business, but I mean, do you feel that some people say the more things change, the more things stay the same? So are you of that school, or do you see yourself as making a difference? One hopes to make a difference, but one is often somewhat discouraged at the obstacles in front of, well, women, you know.
Yeah, I don't think, Manju, that the difference can be made by an individual. It's not a singular thing. But I think individuals can be very instrumental in doing the kind of things that Arundhathi, Mansi, you yourself have done, which is to open the door, which is to start with something completely new, which is to take the courage to say, okay, this is a subject, I'm going to write about it, and then to build on that. So for us, I think the staying the course became possible for a variety of reasons, and they're very contradictory reasons. One, that when we started to publish women, initially nobody really gave a damn, except for women in the women's movement who felt that this was our own publishing house and they would go and buy our books. But gradually that space began to open up. Gradually that space tied in with changes in publishing, where publishing was becoming more and more Indianized. There was a time before it started again to become, in the 90s, it started to become more and more open to foreign capital once we started globalization. So it changed again. But from being mainly focused on textbooks, there was a little opening in English publishing for fiction, for general books. Into that space began the slow and hesitant entry of some women. And that opened the doors for other women. So had those changes not happened in publishing, had those women not entered this space, the door that we tried to open would have remained mostly shut. But it is because of those women, because of what they wrote, because of the experimentation they did, because of the rules they broke, that it became possible for us to continue. So today, in a sense, the role that we play as a feminist publisher, now, you know, every publisher is doing books by women. So you might think it's the end of our, you know, we've served our purpose. Let's get out and quietly go away. But it's not that. And there are moments when I despair and I think, okay, all my authors are flying off to the big publishers, and we've done all this groundwork to bring them to public attention. Then I tell myself, no, that's the purpose of what you're doing, to open the door, and then people will go their own way. And so behind that door, there's a lot more to look for. And I think that's what we keep doing, and that's what keeps me going.
I love that image, opening the door. Wow. So, Urvashi, when I look at your trajectory, you give voice to the voiceless in a way. And your book on partitions, The Voices of Silence, na?
The other side of silence.
The other side of silence, okay. So the other side of silence was giving voice to these men and women, you know, and their experiences of partition. Your latest work is about hijra. So to me, it seems you've done really groundbreaking work in this, you know, whether it's in your publishing or whether it's in your personal creative work. So what is this book, the essay that, you know, this essay about Mona and Granta, which I read, was absolutely amazing. I thought, wow, giving a voice to this woman, it was so marginalized. So what pushes you in that direction? I mean, how come?
I think there are different things that push you to writing what you write. I suppose as a writer, as both our colleagues here have said, and Manju, you yourself. But for me, I think any involvement in the subject I write or what I write about comes from a political ground involvement in that. I'm not scared to say that. I wear my feminist politics on my sleeve. And for example, and I'm proud of it. And I would say to you that one of the first things that feminists, like me, the alpha feminist, notice is the subtle ways in which gender discrimination and assumptions play out in our lives. And it's happening right now in these chairs that we are sitting on, which are designed with male bodies in mind. And if I lean back in my chair in the way that the taller two women in this, who are unusually tall for Indian women, I will be half lying and I will be very inelegant. So that is why I am sitting up straight like this, because I'm a yogi, I can sit straight for an hour, but many women can't. So it's that kind of thing. You start, when you develop the feminist antennae, you notice all of these things. Also, I think it's what has led me to the work that I have done on partition and the work that I've just completed on the history of Mona, my Hijra friend, has been a mix of many things. One, I was led to partition through an involvement in 1984 in Delhi when Indira Gandhi was killed and the Sikhs were attacked. And I worked with a group, an NGO, large NGO, or a community group to work with the people who had faced the brunt of those attacks. And it was the first time that I became aware of my own Sikh identity. It made me realize what privilege does to you, that you don't even know who you are, which if you're a Dalit, you can't forget at every moment of the day. But if you're upper caste Hindu, upper caste Sardar, it's very easy to forget. That led me to it and made me realize the histories that live inside families. Because my own family is a partition family and I'd never looked at it. So for me, that was a very deeply personal exploration. Mona's story came about because of a very deep friendship with Mona. We used to meet in the graveyard where she lived every Sunday. And for 23 years, we met every Sunday and we talked. And we drank whiskey together on a charpai in the graveyard with two masjids on either side and all the mullahs walking past. We sat out in the winter sun and drank whiskeys. And that act of rebellion, I mean, it's the most wonderful let's have a drink moment I've had in my life. So I think that those are the things that led me to it.
Yeah, this Mona story is amazing.